Please be seated and open once again to Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes. We are making really good progress here. The end is just almost in sight. In Ecclesiastes, we're at the end of chapter 9. The end of chapter 9. And I had in my notes last week for us to make it through verse 12, and I didn't quite get there. I got to verse 10, and so we will pick up where we left off and then move on forward into the very beginning of chapter 10 tonight. The way the chapter is cut off here, and there the first verse of chapter 10, I think it really belongs with the previous paragraph. And so we're going to go through the first verse of chapter 10 as we get forward into that section. But before we get there, let's close off on what we were studying last time, because the thought continues from where we were. If you remember last week, or even if you don't, it's still there. He ended the last discussion where he was talking about he ended up talking about the secret to enjoying this life and sort of his advice on how to live your best life. Right? And that's what we get. It's the same sort of notes that we get in several places through Ecclesiastes. He really fills it out there in verses 7 through 10. He talks about the way to enjoy this life, to get the most out of this life, is to enjoy a good meal, right? Enjoy your good meal and do so with a merry heart, knowing that God accepts what you've done. He approves of what you're doing. And, wear nice clothes and fix your hair. Take care of yourself and present yourself well. It says find joy in your wife and your family and your relations, the people you know. And verse 10, it says that you can also find fulfillment in the work that you do. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. All right, so we have this lesson for the good life under the sun here as we're living this side of eternity. We can enjoy the things that we have, even with all of what we've seen before, that things are not simple, they're not easy, there are trials, and oftentimes it's unfair, what he calls the evils of the world, whether it's evils from a person, wicked individuals who are committing these evil things, or if it's just the nature of the broken world, that disasters and evil things happen to people who clearly don't deserve it any more than the next person. And so even though all of these things happen, and we can look at those things and we can let those things bring us down, or we can see those things for what they are, and then we can appreciate the good things that God has given us, and we can find joy and fulfillment in the things that God has given us. And all of those things, from the food that we eat, to our family, to the clothes that we have, to the work that we have to do, the things that we find for our hands to do, work and hobbies, and anything that we can find satisfaction in, that we can do all of that and do it all to the glory of God. And in doing so, in bringing God into it, now we have something that isn't just vanity, that isn't just hevel, that it's not just smoke that goes away, because anything that God does is eternal. Anything that God does lasts. And so if we live our life with God and allowing Him to guide us, and we do our work in Him and to glorify Him, those things now have eternal value. So we ended with a positive note, which is kind of odd for Ecclesiastes. We don't often get to do that. But we ended with a positive note. And so, of course, you know that the very next thing that comes has to be another one of those goads. It has to be another thing to bring you right back down. And so we do. We see here at the end of chapter 9, what seem like to be two of Solomon's greatest frustrations in life. Just two of the things that just really bother him, that just, he says in Verse 13, he says that this seems great to me. This wisdom I've seen under the sun, and it seems great to me. This was something very impactful for him, are these things. And these are just two great frustrations. And the first thing we find in verses 11 and 12, if we read that, it says, I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happens to them all. For man also knows not his time, as the fishes are taken in an evil net, and the birds are caught in the snare. So are the sons of men snared in an evil time, when it falleth suddenly upon him. So he says he returns and he sees under the sun, and the first thing that he sees is this frustration that his wisdom and wealth and all that he has, all that he's built, that even with all of that, success is still not guaranteed. With everything that he has, all the hard work that he has put in, everything that he has done, things still go wrong. Things still happen. Unforeseen things come and ruin all of his plans. And it is one of his great frustrations that we see here, is that as he's looking around and he says he sees under the sun, which he throws in a lot, and we've talked about that several times when he's talking about what happens under the sun. He's not talking about necessarily life without God, which is sometimes how people confuse it, because God is often brought back into play. But he's talking about life on this side of eternity. So under the sun means we haven't gone beyond into heaven yet. So life here on earth is what he's talking about. And so not considering the afterlife in heaven and eternity, just looking at what's going on right now in this world. We live and then we die. So in that time span, so much is hevel, so much is vanity, so much is here and gone, so much is meaningless, but not everything. And yet, all of his wisdom, which he has continued to praise all through the book, wisdom is still the focus, is still his main good, but also there's all of his hard work and all of his effort, which he also praises, and he condemns slothfulness and those things. But even all of that still does not guarantee that things are going to go your way. And I can just picture him going back and reading the book that he wrote that we have as the book of Proverbs, which is primarily written by Solomon. And he goes back and reads those things, and it just, what was I even thinking? Right? Because when you read the book of Proverbs, it's all through there is, if you live this way, then you can expect these things to happen. If you live a good life, then you can expect good reward. If you sow good seed, you can expect good return. If you follow the commands of your father, you can live a long and happy and healthy life. It's all that sort of reasoning. And yet now he has lived his life and he's seen everything going on under the sun, and it's frustrating to him how often that doesn't work the way it's supposed to. Because if everything was right in the world, that's exactly what would happen. That if you live well, then what you sow is what you reap. And so the good things that you do, you receive good in return. And yet so many times that wasn't the case. So many times it failed to work out in that way. And so no matter how hard he worked, and he goes through all of these examples, but it all comes back to the same thing. And so we have always been taught that if you want to get ahead in anything, in whatever it is you want to do, if you want to get ahead, you have to work hard, you have to study hard, you have to practice hard, and the harder you work, the more effort you put into something, the better the return. Right? That's something all of our dads have been teaching us since we first started. I know my dad, one of the things he said to me, I remember as a teenager getting up and going to work and doing all kinds of different jobs, but just nearly every day, I think he said the same thing as I'm leaving. He down, remember, do a little more than you have to do, a little better than you have to do it. That was his advice for going off to work, was if you want to stand out, if you want to be a good worker, do a little more than you have to do and do it a little better than you have to do it. And it is great advice. I think of it all the time, that sets you above just nearly everybody else that you're working with, because so often you do just as much as we have to do and no more, right? Or maybe even a little less if we can get away with it. And so that was his advice. You work a little harder, you do a little more, and you get ahead, and you stand out from the crowd. And that was the same thing doing sports. You know, growing up playing baseball, you go out there and you practice day in and day out. You come home and you practice hitting the ball and throwing and doing all of this stuff, because the harder you work, the more effort you put into it, the better things are going to go whenever you play a game, you get on the team, and you do all of this. That is, you study for a test. The more time you spend studying, the better you're going to do. All of those things. We understand that's how things are supposed to work. That's what is supposed to happen, and yet sometimes it doesn't work out that way. Sometimes things just, no matter how hard we work, things fall apart. Things don't go the way they're supposed to. There's a saying in baseball, anybody can win on any day. It's just sometimes the unexpected happens. And that's what he's talking about here in verse 11, whenever he says time and chance happens to everything, happens to everyone. Time and chance always have to be taken into account, because things don't always go the way they're supposed to. Time is the easy one. Time is inescapable, and we have absolutely no control over it. Right? We as much as we have the little sayings that we like to talk about, saving time or making up for lost time or buying time, we have a lot of sayings like that make us feel like we can have some control over time, that we take time off, or we do all of these things. We take a time out, as if we can have any kind of control over time. That is, the other is saying is more true, that time waits for no man, right? Time goes, and it continues to go, and we have no control over that, and sometimes we just don't have enough. We just can't get there. We're late. We don't have enough time to get everything done, and we have no control over that. Time marches on. It continues forward no matter what, and we have absolutely no control over that. We can plan for it. We can do what we can to arrange things so that time works in our favor, maybe, but we have no control over it. We have to play within those bounds that we're given, the 24 hours in a day. That's what we've got, and we have to make the most of it. We have to redeem it for what we can. But the second part of that is even trickier. It says time and chance. When it talks about time and chance happens to all of these things. Now, when it talks about chance, what's the first thing that comes to our mind? Luck. All right, we think of luck. If there's a chance of something, or a game of chance, we're rolling the dice and see what luck brings about. And so that's what we usually think of, but that's not what it's talking about here. That's not what would come to the Hebrew mind whenever they were reading about chance. Chance isn't talking about luck. It's talking about unexpected events. It's talking about something surprising, something unexpected happening is what chance, when it talks about time and chance. As the Jews even then had a very solid understanding of the sovereignty of God, which hopefully we do as well. And if God is in control, if God is sovereign, then the idea of some force being at work that guides things one way or another, as if luck was something that could be manipulated or could have any control whatsoever, it doesn't make sense, because God is in control. Everything that happens because God wills it. Everything. That is what it means for God to be totally sovereign, to be all-powerful in the world. Nothing happens without God being in control of it. Okay, so the idea of good luck and bad luck as being just things that happen, things that are random, those things are entirely in the hand of God. And so luck in that sense doesn't exist. But from our perspective, there are things that seem unlucky, or days that seem unlucky. And when we say that, it means there are things that happen that we didn't expect, right? Good things or bad things, they're things that we weren't planning for. So if you get a check for a bunch of money in the mail. You say, whew, that was lucky. It arrived just in time. I had something to spend it on. Well, it just means you didn't expect it. There were things that made that happen the way it did. It wasn't just it randomly materialized in your mailbox. There was a series of events that brought that to pass, but you didn't see it coming, right? On the opposite end, if something bad happens, and you could say that was bad luck, or I could say this. I was telling Tommy, I was on my way to work here this morning when I got a call from my wife saying our basement was flooding. And so I did not see that coming. I didn't know. So is that bad luck? Well, from my perspective, that wasn't the best. So I turn around and go home. It's all fixed now. No worries. It's good. But those sorts of things, we could say it's bad luck, it's an unlucky day, or any of those things. What we really mean is unfortunate things happened that we didn't see coming. Okay, so that's what we talk about when we're talking about chance. When it says time and chance happens to all of these things, and what we're saying is that we have no control over the timing of things, and we have no control over events that are outside of our scope. Right? There are things that happen that we have no control over, and they affect us. Even if we don't see them coming, they affect us. And so for these people here that he lists, you have the runner that doesn't win the race. Even if he is the fastest runner, he is the swiftest, that who knows, he could the gun goes off and he takes off and he sprains something and has an injury and he doesn't win the race. Or I remember seeing a video of a race happening with some other events going on in the middle, and just out of nowhere, it looks like a piece of rope or strap flies out onto the track where he's running and wraps around the legs of the lead runner. And he spends several seconds trying to untangle whatever this was that flew in, and he lost the race entirely. And he was the guy in the lead. Now, there was no way to see that coming, and yet he lost the race. I mean, there's no changing it because time and chance, it happens. Sometimes those things are unavoidable. So the runner might lose the race. The warrior, right, the strongest warrior might lose the battle. Even if he trained all his life, even if he thought he had everything planned. It makes me think of Ahab, not the strongest warrior, but he thought he had planned out in this battle how he could stay out of trouble, and he had all this plan. He's disguising himself, and he goes off to an offset part of the battle where there shouldn't be any danger, and yet the Bible says that just a soldier loosed an arrow, just happened to fly his direction and just happened to hit a weak spot in his armor, and he died. Right? He thought he had it all planned out, and yet bad luck, right? There's time and chance. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time, however you want to say it. So the warrior could be surprised by an enemy. The wise man, could be ignored. It doesn't matter how wise you are if no one's listening to your wise advice. The wealthy could suffer. There's any number of things that could go wrong with your wealth. The story. There could be natural disasters. There could be any number of things that happen. And the skilled artist, right? The skill doesn't always have favor. A skilled artist may not get a big break, right? He may not have a chance to show how skilled he is, and so never makes it big, even though he's very talented. So all of those things, you work hard, you do your best, you commit all you can to what you can do, and then still there's an element of time and chance. There's still an element of luck, if that's how you want to think of it. But we get to come to that with the knowledge. This is the advantage of the believer, is we can come to all of that with the knowledge and that God is the one who's in control. And so whenever we come to those things and it looks like everything is just falling apart, I had this great plan, I had it all set, I worked hard to make this happen, and then in the last moment, the bottom falls out from under everything that I had. It just all falls flat. And you've all been there to some degree or another, and you know that frustration. And we can sit in that frustration, and if that is the end, if all that is what's here under the sun, then we can sit in that frustration and there's nothing to do with it. It doesn't go anywhere. We're just stuck with that. But because we know that there is more, because we know that God is sovereign, we can come to that moment and say, okay, God, you've got a plan here. You're in control, and so I'm trusting that even though my plan failed, your plan is still on track. And so we're going to keep on going. And I'm going to just let you prove to me why your plan was better and why my plan needed to fail so that your plan could succeed. And so we move on trusting God. Without God, we don't even have that. And so that is the hope of those of us who are in Christ. Now then there's the final frustration, the final moment that time and chance catch up to us. And it is there in verse 12. The fish that is caught in the net or the bird that is caught in the snare, they're that final frustration. No matter how wise, no matter how wealthy, no matter how healthy, at some point we die. At some point this life ends, and we don't know when that's going to be. Here we are just moving along through time and chance. It's just passing us by. Time is going and chance, all these happenings, whether we see them coming or not, we're like the fish that doesn't know it's wet, right? We're swimming along through this stuff, and everything's going on, whether we're aware of it or not, but at some point, the end comes. We're caught in the net, we're the bird in the snare, and that's the end. And that's the final frustration, is that all of it ends, and there's not a thing in the world we can do about it. The day that happens, while the Bible tells us plainly that God knows the number of our days, it's all planned out. He knows exactly how far our life is going to go. We have no clue. We don't go through life thinking, well, I'm going to get up and go to the dentist tomorrow unless I die tonight, and then I guess I won't. We don't think that way because it would be depressing for one thing. That would be miserable. But we understand, hopefully, that God's the one in control of that. And so while we are living our life, we live with the shadow of knowing that at any point, fish in the net. God can take us out of here. And this life is over. And for those, again, who are without God, everything that they have worked so hard for, all of that effort, all of that time, all of that work is just cut off right there. There's nothing left of it. It means nothing more to them. But for those of us who have been working for the glory of God, now the reward for that only has just begun. We are now going to get to see how all of that pays off in eternity. And so we are to live with that in mind, not just in what we can find here, because what we can find here is only frustration. That's all we can get. And so Solomon's point in all of this is pretty much just don't get too caught up with or too impressed with what you can do. Right? If you may be sitting here and know that you are the swiftest, that maybe that's okay, probably not any of us, but there is something that we have, hopefully, that we take pride in. I worked hard for this. This is something that I hold up, a trophy on the mantle. This is something that I work hard for, that I'm proud of, that I do. Maybe it's your work, maybe it's your family, whatever it is. Something that you take pride in, we have to be careful not to get too caught up in that. Because all of those things are bound up here under the sun with time and chance, and all of those things can be gone. All of those things can go away. Anything that isn't firmly planted in God can just go away. There's a great verse that I come back to so often. It's in Jeremiah chapter 9, verse 23. Thus saith the Lord, let not the wise man glory in his wisdom, neither let the mighty man glory in his might, let not the rich man glory in his riches, but let him that glorieth glory in this, that he understands and knows me, that I am the Lord, which exercises loving kindness, judgment, and righteousness in the earth. For in these things I delight, saith the Lord. Don't waste time bragging about all of these things that you are or that you've done. If you're going to glory in something, if you're going to delight in something, delight in what God's doing and what He's doing through you. That's something that has some real meaning, some real value. So let those things be your focus, because all the glory needs to go to God. And when we do that, we have an advantage. Right? Because if we're just out for ourselves and what we can do, then time and chance happens to all of it. Right? We have no control over that. But if we're working for God, He's the one in control of time and chance. And so we don't have to worry about that anymore. Go back to, in Ecclesiastes, go back to chapter 3. It's been a while, but maybe you'll remember. In chapter 3, verse 1, to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven. You remember that? And then he goes through his little poetic moment talking about a time for this and that and all of that. But then he gets down to verse 10 and he says, I have seen the travail which God has given to the sons of men to be exercised in it. He has made everything beautiful in His time. God owns time. It's His. God owns the seasons that come and go and the passes this way and that. God owns all of that. He's in control of all of it. And so if we are relying in Him and if we are following after His plan, then we don't have to worry about time and chance anymore. We don't have to worry about something suddenly going wrong. This unexpected thing happens and this happens. God is never surprised. His plan never changes. I heard one preacher say, has it ever occurred to you that nothing ever occurs to God? He already knows it. There's no new changes that have to be made because the plan's already there. And all things are going to work according to His plan. And so we don't have to worry about all of those other things. We just trust in God and follow by His plan. And whatever happens may be a surprise to us, but it certainly isn't to Him. And so we can trust in Him for that. So time and chance, they stop mattering whenever we're trusting God. Because in light of eternity, what difference does time and chance make? Right? Once we step outside of under the sun, we step outside of this right now, and one step into eternity, time is meaningless. It's infinite. It's going to keep right on going. So we don't have to worry about timing anymore. And chance, we don't have to worry about luck. There's no more, there may be surprises to us, but they're all going to be good. They're all going to be good surprises. And so we can move forward into eternity, and we truly, time and chance are behind us. We don't have to even think about it anymore. So if we are living in light of eternity, then time and chance lose all power over us because God's in control. All right, so the next section, it seems like he changes gears, but really he's talking about his frustrations here in his efforts to live the good life that we read last time, just enjoying his food, enjoying his clothes, enjoying his wives, and enjoying what God has given him. He's trying to live this life. But the frustrations are that no matter how hard he works and plans, no matter how wise he is, sometimes he still fails. Sometimes things just go wrong because he can't control time and chance. The other thing is that the frustration that wisdom doesn't guarantee that other people will appreciate what you're doing. All of your planning and effort doesn't mean anything if the people around you aren't listening, right? Aren't paying attention, or have no gratitude for what you're bringing to the table. So he gives this little parable, starting in verse 13. He says, "This wisdom have I also seen under the sun, and it seemed great to me. There was a little city, and few men within it. And there came a great king against it, and besieged it, and built great bulwarks against it. Now there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city. Yet no man remembered that same poor man." So here's his story, and this is the stuff of blockbuster feature films, okay? This is what movies are made of. There's this little city, and its walls are defended by just a few people, and the great king with his great army comes in to destroy the city, right? We can picture the movies or read the books. This is a familiar plot. But then there's that one person, probably an orphan, because it's always an orphan, the poor person that's in the city or that comes into town, and they're the one with the special skill, or that's just clever enough by their wit and their wisdom, they save everybody, right? We're familiar with the story. We know the pattern, how this goes. The big king, he comes in, armies and siege weapons and all of these things, and things look terrible. But then in the last moment, the chosen one, whoever that is, saves the day, does something. And with his cleverness and with his wit, he saves everyone. Now, usually in the movies or in the book, he is now a hero, and he's special reward, and everybody remembers him. They make a statue of him and all of that kind of thing. But Solomon says that's not what he's seen. That's not how things work in his world, in the real world. He said that's not how things go. Because even if this poor nobody comes in and saves the whole city, he's not going to get credit for it. Who's going to take credit for this great victory? Whoever is in power, right? Whoever is wealthy and in charge, whoever people are listening to, they're going to take all the credit for themselves, and the poor little nobody goes right back to being a poor little nobody, and nobody appreciates them, even if they are someone of great wisdom. And so that's what he sees, and this is a great frustration to him. And from this parable, he takes a couple of lessons, or one lesson with a couple of ideas behind it. So in verse 16, he says, "Then said I," so this is what he gets from it, "Wisdom is better than strength. Nevertheless, the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. If the words of wise men are heard in quiet, the words of wise men are heard in quiet more than the cry of him that ruleth among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. Dead flies cause the ointment of the apothecary to send forth a stinking savor. So doth a little folly him that is in reputation for wisdom and honor." So here we have his takeaway from this. What lesson is he supposed to learn? What lesson is he trying to teach us? Well, wisdom is better, but wisdom is better than strength, but people are more likely to listen to you if you also have wealth and power and influence. So wisdom is great, but it'll only get you so far. Wisdom is great, but it might not be all that you need. The second part, wisdom is better than weapons of war, but a little sin can ruin everything. Right? Sin brought in just all of the good that can be done by wisdom can be undone and just worsened and ruined by sin. So for Solomon, you can almost hear the frustration, because Solomon, who is Solomon but the wise king? This is his whole life is built on his wisdom and all that he had accomplished because of his wisdom, and yet he sees the frustration of wisdom will only get him so far. Or looking at others who he seems to be wise, he calls wise, and he says they just can't get past all of these other obstacles that are in their way, even though they seem to be wise. And what he is teaching here is that wisdom is good. It is better than being foolish, but don't expect your wisdom to always be appreciated. But he gives some things to look out for, some warnings that especially if you surround yourself with fools. Notice that there in verse 17, the words of wise men are heard in quiet more than the cry of him that rules among fools. It doesn't matter how wise you are if your words of wisdom are being drowned out by the noise of a bunch of foolish people speaking. Right? So if you surround yourself with fools, even if you are ruling, right? He says the one who rules over fools. Even if they're looking to you, you're not going to be heard. Your wisdom is going to be ignored, and it's not going to be appreciated. So wise words, it's better to be wise and quiet, to not have all of the popularity, to not have all of the followers, all of the hangers-on, because for some reason, our world seems to appreciate foolishness, doesn't it? They just flock to it. And we see it everywhere. And the wise words go unnoticed. They go ignored. That doesn't make them any less wise. They're just not appreciated by a world that is blinded by sin and darkness. They just go unheeded. And so he says, don't expect your wise words to be appreciated if you surround yourself with fools. The second thing is, don't expect your wisdom to be appreciated if you're also poisoning your own well. Right? Those are my words, but notice how he says there, in verse 10, the dead flies cause the ointment of the apothecary to send forth a stinking savor. So doth a little folly him that is in reputation for wisdom and honor. So you might be building up a reputation for wisdom and honor. In fact, you might spend your whole life building up a reputation for wisdom and honor and truth and character and all of those things. And then something happens, right? We're all too used to it in our culture that this person who is held up on a pedestal, who's respected, who's seen as a man to be listened to, a wise man, maybe a godly man, and then the news breaks of some sin that they've been hiding, something that nobody knew about, and everyone's shocked to hear it. And then all of that wisdom, all of that effort, all of that work to be wise and to be honorable is just gone. It's gone. It's the ointment that's been stunk up by these flies. Right? It's no longer any good. It's ruined, all of it. And so he's saying, don't expect your wisdom to be heard if you're stinking it up with your own sin. Nobody's going to want to listen to it. It's not going to get anywhere. So if you want to be wise, you want to be known to be wise, these are things to avoid. Don't surround yourself with fools because your wisdom's not going to be appreciated. They're not going to hear it. It's not going to be heard. It's going to be drowned out by foolishness. And if you want to be wise, if you want to grow in wisdom and in honor, don't poison the well by allowing your sin into the mix. Right? Keep it out. Okay? Keep yourself clean, keep yourself where you need to be, because that is going to ruin every bit of wisdom, every bit of audience that you have. It's going to be driven away by your sinfulness if you don't keep it out. Okay, so that's his advice, and those are his frustrations, and we can understand for Solomon, knowing what we do of his life, we can see that. We can see how his own sin got in the way of his wisdom. Now, he surrounded himself, he said in an earlier chapter, that he was looking for wise men and women, and he couldn't find any, because he had surrounded himself with fools, with people who were just hanging on because of his wealth and his power. And he was frustrated by that and felt stuck by that. And so here is his advice to whoever would come after and listen is, don't glory in your own strength. Don't glory in your own wisdom. Glory in God. Let him be the focus. Trust in him, because his way is not going to be ruined by some unlucky circumstance. It's not going to be ruined by running out of time or things not falling into place just right. God's plan is going to succeed. So go along with his plan. And don't let yourself worry about making a name for yourself. Don't worry about all of that. Let your wisdom be grounded in God and in following God's plan. I have just a couple minutes over in 2 Corinthians. In 2 Corinthians, Paul's writing, of course, and he's writing to a group of people who are being led astray by false teachers. They're following men, and the reason they seem to be following these false teachers is because they're just charismatic leaders. They're the kind of people that you want to follow. They're good speakers, or they're popular or good looking, or I don't know what it is, but they're drawing people away, and it's all based on them, on what they've done, on who they are, and what they've accomplished. And so in chapter 11, here Paul, he's says, if this is what you're looking for, then let's talk about that. What do these men have to boast about? Paul says, if we're talking about what we've accomplished, let's talk about me. He says in verse 16, he says, well, let no man think me a fool, if otherwise, yet as a fool receive me, that I may boast myself a little. He says, just give me a minute, and I'm going to step down to their level. I'm going to talk like a fool for a few minutes, so I'm not, you know me, but let's play their game for a minute. What do I have to boast in? And what did Paul have to boast about? Right? Paul could talk about his education. He could talk about his pedigree. He could talk about all of those things. And in other places he does. He talks about those things and says those things are not worth anything. Right? That's just a bunch of garbage. But here he says, okay, what do I have to boast in? And this is where he goes into, in verse 24, how he was beaten 40 times, or he was 5 times received I 40 stripes, save one, thrice beaten by rods. Once I was stoned, I suffered shipwreck 3 times. He goes into all of these times that he had suffered for the cause of Christ. Says, okay, let's boast a little bit. They're all boasting about their accomplishments. I'll play the fool. Let me boast in my accomplishments. Well, there was that time I got stoned. It was the time I was in a shipwreck. Oh, man, all of the beatings. You should have seen my back after all those beatings that I got. It's not generally the kind of things you boast about. And Paul says, if I have anything to boast about in my flesh, it's that it has just been beaten near to death for the cause of Christ. This is all this body is good for, is to just be beaten black and blue for the cause of Christ. So let's glory in that. He says over in he talks about in the next chapter, in chapter 12, that lest he should be exalted above measure, God had sent him the thorn in the flesh. And then verse 9, he says, and he said unto me, this is the Lord answering his prayer, God says, my grace is sufficient for thee, my strength is made perfect in weakness. And so Paul continues, most gladly, therefore, I would rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, and in necessities, in persecutions, and in distresses, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. When I'm weak, he makes me strong. That is what Paul says, if I'm going to glory in anything, let's talk about all those times when I was not enough. And yet God got me through it anyway. His will was accomplished. All of those times when he worked hard, he studied hard, he did everything that he could and still failed. Just like Solomon was talking about. Time and chance happened. The timing was wrong, just a bad luck. The ship got in a shipwreck and everything. Time and chance happened over and over again to Paul, and anyone looking might say that was a complete failure. Everything had gone wrong. And yet, Paul says, those are the moments I'm the most proud of. Those are the moments when my plans fell apart, but God really shined right there. And God really, he showed off right in that moment, because there was nothing I could do, but God made it work anyway. Isn't that amazing? And so that's got to be our attitude, at least under the sun. That's what we're looking for. It's those moments we work hard, we do our best, we plan, we strive after wisdom, and we strive after skill and all of those things. But in those moments when our very best have fallen flat because of time or chance or whatever else, in those moments, that's when we say, God, you must have something great planned for right now, because I've got nothing more to give, so whatever happens next is all you. And that's when we can expect amazing things to happen, because that's when God is going to take our broken mess and turn it into something great. And all we can do is step back and say, it wasn't me. I failed way back there. God got me here. And that's when God receives the most glory. And in his glory, we come out even better. And so that's what we're looking for. That's what we're trusting in, is in those moments right there. Anyone have anything you'd like to share? Any thoughts or questions or anything at all? All right, let's stand and we'll pray one more time and be dismissed. Ty, would you lead us in prayer, please?